Lately, I have found it quite hard to have the opportunity to produce a games review, and that isn't because I haven't had the time, it's more because I would only think about writing a review once I've actually completed the game, and that is something that I tend not to accomplish as often as I would like, simply for the fact that I have too many games on the go at the same time. But every now and again, I will get a sudden urge to play through a game from start to finish and ignore everything else. Strangely, this tends to happen with games that I've never really played or had previous conceptions of liking. As an example, after playing the demo for the original Ghost Recon on PS2, I was left with nothing but disdain, primarily because you couldn't see your gun and you only had an aiming reticule. But some weeks, maybe months later, the game popped into my head again, and I decided that not seeing your gun would actually be more of an immersive experience, for whatever reason, and that I must have the game and rushed out to buy it. Anyway, getting back on track, the random urge came this time in the form of The Evil Within. I had played The Evil Within before, around about the time of release, and remember liking it, but not having a massive urge to carry on with it. I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps it was due to the impossible hype of a new Shinji Mikami game, one that was being billed as a pseudo-successor to Resident Evil 4 no less. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought Resident Evil 4 was a fantastic game, but fantastic game only, not a sterling Resident Evil game. In fact, it probably started the franchise on its decline. And before anyone feels the need to correct me on why Resident Evil 4 is the biggest gift from our Lord, as a Resident Evil title, it just isn't as good as this. Or more importantly, this. Although miles better than this. But this is better than that. Anyway, without Resident Evil 4, Mikami would never have been able to make Vanquished, which is my favourite game of the last generation of consoles. I think the point that I'm trying to get to is that Shinji Mikami has a great track record of making games which are extremely fun to play, so that is the mindset that you should adapt when going into one of his games, and not how does it compare to a similar game. The game begins without any backstory, dropping us in mid-scene with our main protagonists. It is quickly established that you are all law enforcement being called in to investigate a report of multiple homicide at a nearby mental hospital. The opening scene doesn't linger too long before you are given control of your playable character, the ludicrously named Detective Sebastian Castellanos. You, along with your fellow colleague Joseph, make your way into the hospital plastered with dead bodies in search of survivors, discovering only one in form of Dr. Marcello. Your attention is then averted to the security camera footage in pursuit of the reason for the carnage, where a strange, ghostly, Assassin's Creed resembling figure appears jump cutting around the scene, slicing everyone's throat before pulling a Houdini directly behind you.
What the hell?
When you come to, you are hanging upside down in an environment somewhere between Saw and Hostel, and that's really all the setup you need as you are thrown into the rest of the game. This starting section acts as somewhat of a tutorial, setting you up with the stealth mechanics, the basis of which are standard for games set in the third person, crouch slightly and move below short partitions. This gives a first impression of a game that's going to be much slower paced than what we are used to from Mikami, although those theories are challenged around about the time you wander into a food processor. I actually really like this opening. On paper, it doesn't seem like the most original idea in the world, but it is achieved quite successfully. Hobbling down these long hallways, not knowing if you're being chased, or have a maximum amount of time to spend searching around, really does the job of supplying you with the appropriate amount of tension, and when it came into hiding in lockers, I was genuinely hesitant on whether it was safe to proceed or not. I think that it helps that your character is completely weaponless. Something that not too many games would keep in play for the entirety of the game, and The Evil Within is no exception here. After a dramatic escape from the hospital, where the world seems to tear itself a new one, you wake up in a hospital, complete with your own private nurse. This small limbo-esque environment acts as your safe house. From here you can save your progress and upgrade certain attributes, but we'll get onto that later. Access to the hospital can be done by finding mirrors scattered around the levels, which have accompanying music letting you know that one's nearby. Chapter 2 in the game is where you are really let off the reins, so to speak, introducing you to your first proper taste of combat. Shooting is accomplished in the way that has become custom for third-person action games. You hold down one button to aim and look around whilst the other one fires. You can also walk slowly whilst aiming, and you have melee combat as a last resort. Your punch attack will prove most useful for smashing open crates and boxes which are scattered throughout the game, housing ammo and items. One unique addition to the Evil Within is the inclusion of matches. These are used to set fire to corpses and in rare occasions destroy debris. Although, to be perfectly honest, I never really discovered what the point of this was, and I still don't completely know. The opening chapters stick to the theme of the introduction by being primarily a stealthy affair. You certainly don't gain enough ammo for your starting pistol to take down every bad guy, so guns for now are to be used in a pinch. Stealth slowly becomes a bit more dynamic with the inclusion of bottles which can be thrown for distraction, allowing you to sneak up behind for a one-hit execution. I quite like how the one-hit takedown looks. A knife straight to the back of the bonds would certainly be the most effective way to do it. However, it does make you wonder why Sebastian defaults to a 180-degree arcing punch when he has a knife at hand. Throwing bottles can also be used to stagger an enemy, or if you have the opportunity, can be used to lead them into traps. Yes, scattered throughout the majority of the game are various types of traps, which range in their triggers from tripwires to proximity and manually operated. The manually operated traps don't come very often, but when they do, as I'm sure they would be in real life, they are a blast to use. The more two commonplace traps which appear throughout the game are the aforementioned tripwire and proximity, and both of these can be disarmed, giving you usable parts for later on in the game. Both trap types come with a trade-off, however. Whilst the tripwires are easy to disarm, they can be difficult to see, meaning you are prone to run straight through them if you aren't paying too much attention. The proximity mines, on the other hand, will warn you with a beeping sound if you are getting too close to them. Avoiding these is as simple as sneaking, but disarming them involves a little timed minigame where you must stop the hand of a clock from spinning on the right section, and if you miss, well... It shouldn't take too long to get your bearings with the game, in terms of how it plays and which approach you should take with enemies, and by chapter 3 you will have acquired your lantern, probably run out of syringes, and collected numerous jars of what the game calls green gel. This brain gloop acts as your in-game currency, which can be used in the Save Hospital's electric chair to purchase new abilities and level up your weapons. There is a lot to choose from in terms of upgrades. Most every weapon can be upgraded to have increased power, accuracy, fire rate, reload time and critical hit. Along with this you can upgrade your carrying capacity for ammo, matches, syringes, along with the abilities to include sprint times, maximum health and melee damage. It is a little bit overwhelming at first to know what to choose, as you don't really have much gel early on, and not knowing how many extra weapons you will acquire will leave you hesitant to upgrade the starting pistol, in theory of it being redundant after the next chapter. Speaking of weapons, the game thankfully throws a few extra ones your way early on, but the pace at which you discover these will vary due to some brilliant level design. Chapter 3 is host to a small village of houses with upper and lower floors, with enemies wandering around. How you explore these houses is entirely down to your own discretion, and this really helps to give you the feeling that your experience is quite unique to you. The first new weapon you will probably acquire will be your agony bow, and with the increased amount of enemies this couldn't come any sooner. The weapon is a lot of fun from start to finish. There is something just so satisfying about firing a projectile at an enemy rather than just shooting a bullet. Especially if that projectile explodes seconds after. The bow becomes almost an individual arsenal all by itself, and this is down to having its own array of bolts to choose from, all with different impacts and effects. And all of these bolts can be crafted with the parts that you gather from traps. Within 5 or so minutes of finding your agony bow, you will also find the staple of any shooter, the shotgun, and this has an appropriate amount of impact and head exploding capability. It is worth noting that this is around where I lost interest with the game the first time playing it, but whatever it was that put me off before wasn't replicated on this playthrough. Perhaps it was the horrible movie borders, which thankfully now have the option to be turned off, along with the motion blur. So on a second playthrough, I can say I enjoyed it up to this point a lot more than I did the first time round, but starting strong isn't anything if you don't have the means to live up to the expectations you set yourself, so how does the rest of the game hold up? As to not jump the gun, I will go back and address a few things I've omitted so far. Firstly, how the game looks. It's great. Its Tech 5 engine is holding up really well, and some of the stage designs here are occasionally awe-inspiring. Also, the engine is built well enough that this quality does not decrease when transitioning from interior to exterior settings. On the controls front, I might have a slightly skewed opinion here, as I was using a keyboard and mouse, which at first didn't seem right for an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, but actually turned out to be a lot better than I'd expected. This was mostly down to how much easier it was to aim with the mouse than with the thumbstick, meaning that the accuracy upgrade you can purchase for each weapon never really got a second thought. My one complaint about the controls, however, is that sneaking does not toggle. The key has to be held down, which if you are in a slightly tense moment trying to disarm a bomb before a big bastard spots you, can make you mess up from time to time. On the subject of big bastards, enemies as expected get progressively larger in quantities and stature as the levels go on, and this coincides perfectly with the enhancements made to your weapons and character. One thing The Evil Within manages to keep up through its chapters is the need for ammo conservation, and this is to the game's credit. A fully upgraded shotgun is nothing if you don't have any shells for it, and the game is stingy at best with giving you quantitative drops. The majority of the time you will be lucky to pick up more than 2 bullets at a time, and for the most part leaves you getting to the next chapter just by the skin of your teeth. I really like this. It keeps you thinking and forces strategy to your combat approach, and quite often requires you to have a plan B in case things go pear-shaped. Scouting out a place to retreat to, or a trap you have left live to lure someone into, always feels good when it comes into fruition. This all helps to build up a disciplined pace, which is nicely met with a quick turnover of locations and settings. It won't take too long to have transitioned from the slow-paced, dark, stealthy environments of the villages to Silent Hill-inspired derelict apartment buildings to surprisingly sunny outdoor sections complete with sniper rifle battles. This is a great mix, because the locations change so rapidly that you never get bored of your journey and it keeps you intrigued as to where you might end up next. But because the progression of your character's stats and abilities is at such a slow pace, you never feel detached from Sebastian as a character or feel like you're just stuck in a series of random environments. And that brings me to what I think is on one hand The Evil Within's biggest flaw, and the thing you can ignore the most because it really doesn't matter, and that is the way the narrative is constructed. Now don't get me wrong, I know as much as the next person with half a brain does that to be enjoyable, a game only really needs to pick one part of itself to excel at. Games don't need to have stories, some just need good gameplay. Some games have great stories but don't need gameplay at all. Take Heavy Rain for example. Other games just get by on their artistic look alone, so to say the story is told a bit poorly is a bit of a redundant statement, only worth mentioning in case the story is the sole purpose for someone's purchase. The game tries to keep its hand hidden, only alluding to parts of the plot as you work your way through the chapters. This is done competently in terms of the slow reveal, however it does also throw up confusing instances which affect our character's location. Quite often the game will just throw you into a random location without any real reason for it. I believe what is trying to be achieved here is a metaphorical transition, something which has a deeper meaning to what's on screen, but it ended up happening so often that I felt a slight disconnect and realisation that, oh, this is just a game. With that said, some of the random locations you end up in are really fun to play, especially this one towards the end of the game, which reminded me of the last level from Doom 2. Another aspect of the game I suppose should be addressed is its horror status. Primarily the question, is it scary? I wouldn't say it's scary, it's creepy. In fact, it can be really creepy. It certainly has its moments that put you on edge. One enemy in particular is completely invisible until it lunges at you, and knowing these were running around whilst knocking wheelchairs out of the way was a gaming experience that made me genuinely tense in the best way possible. There is also when you are forced to perform a slow action whilst the camera pans out, and it comes as no surprise when a massive enemy walks into frame, but it still sends that immediate rush of panic to you whilst you try to remember which button cancels what you are doing. There are a lot of mixed opinions on this game, and most of the shortcomings people bring up I would agree with, although I don't see them as a problem. One thing I would say is a bit of a problem is the upgrade system. It really needs a few things chopping out. I can't think of any playthrough where I would favour shotgun reload times over critical damage, especially as sparse as the currency already is. Also, to have a limit on the amount of matches you can hold is a stupid idea. Luckily though, if you are fresh out of money and ammo, there are hidden throughout the stages small praying statues, seen here being held by Dougal from Father Ted, which once broken open contains a single key which can be used to unlock one of the many safes located in the safe hospital. These often contain huge deposits of one type of ammunition, healing aids or upgrade gel. My other little gripe with the game is that it is a bit too long. As there is an achievement for completing the game in under 5 hours, and I had hit almost double that, I thought the game would be coming to an end around chapter 10. I'm not going to tell you how many chapters there are in case you wouldn't want to know, but it's a lot more than 10. Also, I hope you like footage of people holding their temples. Calm down, have a paracetamol. I really enjoyed playing through The Evil Within. As a fan of horror games, I enjoyed the references to everything it was pulling from, and as a fan of shooters, the combat never got boring, especially when heads exploded. You can pick up The Evil Within for very little money on any platform. However, I did first buy this on the PS4, and I have to tell you, it did not look very good or run particularly well, even with all the patches, so I would stick to the PC version if you have the chance. I realise that I have omitted from this review details of the plot, and this is because whilst it might be told in a bit of a backwards way, it is by no means bad, and I really wouldn't want to ruin it for anyone who doesn't see what's coming. So, to give you a quick summary, the combat is solid, the atmosphere is great, you get your money's worth for the length of the game, perhaps too much for your money, but still, and I've avoided talking about them as I don't want to spoil them, but the boss battles are something to really look forward to. It's a really fun, well-priced, well-paced shooter, and if you haven't played it, you could do a lot worse than The Evil Within. Thank you very much for watching. I know I don't get these reviews out as much as I'd hoped to, but I will do my best to get one out sooner in the future.